The following video is based off another video by Retro Reports, a friend of the channel. He's a man close to the ground, a video game developer who has seen the inner machinery of this industry firsthand. In his video, he offered an internal account of the video game industry, foregrounding the business mechanics that often remain obscured beneath layers of consumer spectacle. Drawing on his first-hand experience as a developer and supplementing it with such empirical data as could be obtained, his aim was not merely to inform, but to illuminate, specifically to bring to light those aspects of the industry that are habitually neglected or rendered invisible by prevailing discourse. The content he presented was, in my view, both compelling and necessary, and thus I have taken it upon myself to assist in the further dissemination of this knowledge, refracted through the prism of my own rhetorical performance and platform. And so let us turn our attention to the business and marketing dynamics behind Expedition 33, a topic that will no doubt be eclipsed by the sensational acclaim surrounding the game itself. Expedition 33 is by most accounts emerged as an overnight sensation, a French deployed RPG, or JRPG is it, that seemingly materialized from obscurity to sell over 2 million copies in just 2 weeks, and also accompanied somehow by a film deal that was already in place prior to the game's release. For such a small and allegedly independent team, this is a curious origin story for an indie game. Was the success of Expedition 33 simply a tale of grassroots triumph, or is there something more calculated beneath the surface? Well, the game, now widely celebrated as a multimedia breakout, is in fact the latest title to be launched under the banner of Kepler Interactive, a publisher that styles itself as independent and decentralized. But what many may not realize is that this is neither Kepler's first critical success, nor even its first film adaptation, and so a pattern arises here and bears closer scrutiny. In February of 2022, Kepler Interactive published Sifu, a video game that achieved both critical and commercial success, and much like Expedition 33, Sifu was followed by a film adaptation deal with Story Kitchen, though in that case, the agreement materialized 10 months post-release. A deviation in timing perhaps, but not in pattern. This repetition raises a question: who exactly is Kepler Interactive, and how exactly has this ostensibly new player in the games industry attained such leverage? Many articles exist that relay a conventional narrative. Kepler is a decentralized collection of studios, a publisher owned by its developers, and so on and so forth. Much of this coverage remains cursory. Amid the noise, however, two sources stood out. A 2021 article from the website kakuchopure.com entitled "Kepler Interactive is a Singapore-based global publisher run by super game developers," offers a succinct overview of the company's structure and ambitions. It observes, "The last time we heard of a publishing company run by game developers was back in 2003. It came out and fizzled after a year or so of hype. Hopefully, Kepler Interactive and its motley don't fall for the same trap and actually keep word on their promised titles." This branding, Kepler as a developer-led, co-owned indie publisher, naturally appeals to creatives who seek artistic freedom without the liabilities of total independence. The creative lead of Expedition 33, Guillaume Broche, articulated this alignment in a French interview, saying, "We really sympathize with Kepler Interactive, which is a publisher made up of numerous independent dev studios that reunite to create one publisher. We really wanted this indie vibe, and overall to keep this creative liberty. If we have this creative liberty at 100% and someone gives a shit, in the end, this is what we had. And that's what's so great. And that's the big reason why this whole thing worked. It's that Kepler supported us. Actually, when we made playtests with 30 people, they gave us feedback." The ethos described here is one of autonomy undergirded by structure, the illusion of independence, buttressed by an infrastructure sophisticated enough to run coordinated user testing and early feedback loops. And what we find then is not quite a return to the romanticized, auteur model of indie development, nor the totalizing grip of corporate oversight, but a hybrid form, a curated independence, facilitated by a publisher that remains agile in its rhetoric while quietly securing movie deals and multi-million-dollar launches. Such arrangements are not unprecedented. Indeed, they bear resemblance to what other industries have long perfected: the branding of creative freedom, even rebellion, as a commercially viable identity, an identity made palatable to both consumers and investors. Whether this is liberation or simply a clever repackaging of control is a question that deserves more attention than it typically receives. Think of it this way: calling Expedition 33 an indie hit is a bit like calling Rebecca Black's viral YouTube fame a grassroots phenomenon. Sure, the video was uploaded like any other YouTube video would be, but behind it was a wealthy parent who financed the production, the promotion, and the polish, creating the illusion of organic virality from what was in essence a boutique media package. Remember too, you also had French President Emmanuel Macron and Kim Hyung-tae, director of Stellar Blade, who also publicly praised Expedition 33, an endorsement that, while flattering, also raises questions about the broader political and industrial forces shaping the game's reception. To the mainstream gaming press, Kepler Interactive is presented as a kind of utopian exception to the traditional publisher-developer dynamic, a democratized developer-led alternative that purports to break the historical chains of top-down creative control. And here Kepler emerges as Liberator, a decentralized network where artists, not executives, supposedly set the terms of production. The narrative is clear and appealing, particularly to a consumer base increasingly wary of corporate influence and eager to support the mythos of the indie underdog. Yet in the financial press, a different face of Kepler emerges, one less romantic and more institutional. A 2021 Routers article titled "Gaming Company Kepler Raises $120 Million from China's NetEase" offers an illuminating contrast. In it, CEO Alexis Garavarian describes Kepler's internal governance structure. "We have a studio committee which meets on a weekly basis. They get involved in major company decisions, but they don't get involved in individual studio decisions, so the studios remain independent." It is a carefully worded arrangement. Studios are independent, but that of course is provided their autonomy does not conflict with the collective's strategic direction, an architecture of freedom framed within the polite margins of capital efficiency. The article goes on to draw a direct comparison with Sweden's Embracer Group, another conglomerate that purchased smaller studios while allowing them nominal operational freedom. This model, Reuters notes approvingly, helped Embracer become Europe's largest video game company. The implication is clear: creative liberty, when properly managed, is not only compatible with aggressive corporate scaling, it is a selling point. Here then is the dual mythology of Kepler Interactive: indie anarchism for the press releases, strategic coherence for the investors. The Reuters article casually notes that while Garavarian declined to disclose Kepler's valuation, he confirmed that NetEase would remain a minority investor. The phrasing obviously meant to imply that NetEase's presence would be peripheral, not a directive. Now, who exactly is Alexis Garavarian, the architect behind Kepler's hybrid model of indie aesthetics and global capital? To summarize him, one might quote a longtime associate: "He's not on LinkedIn because he's a secretive little French man." Quip aside, Garavarian's resume reads like a compressed history of the industry's convergence between East and West, indie and corporate. He began at Ubisoft in 2008 as part of their partners team, then moved in 2012 to Microsoft's Xbox division, where he worked on first-party and indie developer relations. In 2015, he joined Tencent's investment arm, helping bring independent games into China through its Wii game service. This eastward turn would shape the next phase of his career. In 2017, Garavarian co-founded Kowloon Nights, a $100 million global games fund, along with Jay Chi, Lindsay Rostel, Ryan Payton, and Sam Lee. A lean operation, just 10 employees, but its financial footprint is far more substantial. According to a 2020 Game Daily article, Garavarian's experience with Tencent and Xbox created a continuity between independent developer support and multinational strategy. Garavarian's experience in the East should prove valuable for indies as well, the article states. The name Kowloon Nights is indicative of the Asian influence in the fund. Not only is it a reference to Hong Kong's Kowloon City, but the primary source of money is a group of undisclosed investors in Asia, which Garavarian believes are more risk tolerant. tolerant. There's something revealing in the industry's preferred archetype of patronage, anonymity coupled with risk tolerance. The ideal financier in this scheme is not the meddling executive or the meddlesome marketer, but the invisible underwriter, the quiet presence who funds creative freedom while abstaining from direct interference, at least overtly. It is a theology of capital in which providence never interferes with free will, though it always guides it. This ideology is not articulated explicitly, but it is encoded in the careers of those like Yami Broche and Alexis Garavarian, whose resumes trace a path through the connective tissue of transnational capital. Garavarian in particular presents a case study in the new technocratic independence, a mode of development wherein autonomy is never quite severed from the umbilical cord of investment. His progression from Xbox to Tencent to Kepler Interactive charts a vision of indie production that is meticulously scaffolded by institutions of global finance and platform governance. To say that Garavarian once worked at Tencent is not merely to furnish a CV detail. It is to recognize a deeper infrastructure of alignment. That Sifu and Expedition 33 found commercial success not only in the Western markets, but also in China is unlikely to be explained solely by genre appeal or marketing prowess. If we are dissuaded from naming structural advantages for fear of seeming conspiratorial, we should instead ask, why is that explanation so persistently discouraged? The point is not that performance in the Chinese market indicates covert manipulation. Rather, it illustrates that independent success frequently emerges from conditions that are anything but. These games do not arrive by accident. They are not simply found. They are positioned. One such axis of positioning is Microsoft's Game Pass, where Expedition 33 launched, a seemingly minor footnote unless one considers the architecture of visibility that undergirds modern game discovery. A game-side pass launch is not the indie equivalent of a roadside fruit stand. It is an entrance into a curated retail cathedral. Inclusion signals alignment not just with quality, but with the strategic goals of the platform itself. Behind this carefully engineered visibility stands a scaffolding of investment networks, and at its center, figures like Jay Chi, co-founder of Kowloon Nights, and according to industry consensus, one of its primary financiers. Chi's public resume centers on his current role at Makers Fund, a venture capital group so entangled in the gaming sector that enumerating its full reach would be less an appendix than a treatise. But as with so many actors in this space, the relevant information is not only what is present, but what is inherited. Chi is a former partner at McKinsey & Company, a firm whose cultural footprint exceeds its name recognition. McKinsey is not merely a consultancy, it is a global node of managerial rationality, an author of the very logic by which capital assesses, governs, and extracts value. That Chi's pedigree traces through McKinsey is not incidental, it is formative. Nor is he alone. Samuel Sun Lee, now Chief Operating Officer at Kepler Interactive, also bears the McKinsey imprint, along with prior posts in banking at HSBC and the Bank of China. These are not creative backgrounds, they are infrastructural ones. The people who now shape independent game publishing are drawn not from their parents' garages or modding forums, but from financial institutions implicated in some of the most consequential economic and political entanglements of the past 2 decades. These are not merely financiers, they are architects of the present economic order. That their hands now guide the direction of ostensibly independent gaming should not be surprising, but it should not go unnoted. One final architect worth recovering, now scrubbed from the foreground of public discourse, is the Fairchild Initiative, once a prominent feature of the Kowloon Nights website. Though it has since faded into digital obscurity, its ideological function remains potent.
My name is Kendall Deacon Davis. I am an advisor with Kowloon Nights, and I'm going to give a talk that's going to give you a little bit of context around who Kowloon Nights is. We also have something called the Fairchild Initiative, which is a diversity endeavor targeted at Black developers. Kowloon is a global games fund, so we have a team distributed around the world, and we are dedicated to enabling independent game developers. Normally, publishing and funding have been tightly coupled in the history of the industry, and that creates a very inequitable relationship for the developer, for the studio, as they're trying to get a game made. They don't have much leverage. So we want to tilt the playing field, and we want to tilt the very context of how funding happens for games. So what that means is we are focused on empowering the developer. Number one, we want to look for really strong creative visions with distinct style and a distinct voice. And we want to empower those people. We are a global games fund. We are independent. We're not connected to any publishers. We exist as a place where developers can go to receive funding and receive project financing that is outside of the traditional developer-publisher relationship. And we really believe that that's a formula and a pathway that's going to create better games. So diversity has always been an implicit goal for Kowloon Nights. The makeup of our team is diverse. The teams that we fund are diverse. It's something that we've always been looking for, because we believe that the more diverse voices that are supported, the more interesting titles get made. Number one, that is going to mean, I think, just better games that get released, period. But also what it's going to mean is it's going to start shifting the subject matter, the tone, the types of representation that we see within the industry. And that's really important. It's a mission that everyone on our team holds incredibly near and dear. Our ultimate goal in terms of diversity is to support even more diverse studios. We want to invest in projects that will lead to studios being created and those studios having demonstrable, sustainable success. And the Fairchild Initiative, which is specifically for Black creators, what we want is we want a good game to result in a studio being built and a culture of diversity, an amazing creative culture that can hire in interesting, diverse people, and that can grow over time. We believe that successful studios led by Black creators are going to have hiring practices and culture and environment that does help to tilt the scales in terms of the industry's demographic makeup. That's really, I can't say it any better than that. That's really why the Fairchild Initiative exists. The Fairchild Initiative is a $2 million allocation of our fund, and that is dedicated towards finding Black creators, Black owned and Black led studios, and then trying to go down the path that I just laid out. So while we are not a publisher, we can work behind the scenes to help developers reach success. But we will be, our whole team will be ready, available, and willing to help fill in some of those gaps, to help make suggestions, to give advice, all the things that a developer might need in order to get a game across the finish line, in order to release a good game, a game that's received well by players, and that will lead to the building of a sustainably successful studio. What we're hoping to do is to help enable developers, Black developers, to take a strong step forward. And the more of those steps that get taken, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And each step that gets taken that starts to change the makeup of the world is something that we really, really believe in. And the Fairchild Initiative is our first step there.
Indeed, Kowloon Nights is a known proponent of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. But they're far from alone. Another key advocate behind Expedition 33 is, surprisingly, or perhaps not, the French government itself. More specifically, the regional authorities of the Occitanie and the National Film and Arts Board, the CNC, National Center for Cinema and Animation. Let us begin with the Occitanie region, a county in southern France stretching from the Pyrenees Mountains to the Mediterranean coast. Known for its picturesque tourism, Occitanie has, in recent years, recast itself as an emerging industrial and tech zone under the leadership of Carole Delga, a Socialist Party member and president of the region since 2016. In an official promotional article titled Occitanie, Land of Success for the Video Game Industry, the article says, with 1,500 jobs and 125 companies located in Occitanie, the video game sector is fully aligned with this proactive policy. To enable its development, the region supports local businesses through individual grants, prestigious partnerships, and local initiatives. The goal? To encourage creative diversity, stimulate economic dynamism, support stakeholder growth, and showcase regional expertise. Ah yes, one can only assume Carol Delga's regional enrichment plan is proceeding swimmingly. But let us now turn to the CNC, a powerful agency under the French Ministry of Culture. Its stated mission is to regulate and promote France's cultural output in film, television, and increasingly, video games. The CNC plays a crucial role in shaping the French gaming industry through a system of grants and tax credits. According to the CNC's official documentation, Crédit d'impôt jeux vidéo, or translated as Video Game Tax Credit, provides a tax rebate of up to 20% on qualifying production expenses for studios operating in France. To be eligible, a game must meet specific criteria: a minimum production budget of €100,000, clear intent to distribute commercially, and, more curiously, a development team composed primarily of EU or EEA nationals. In other words, non-Europeans who have obtained French residency. Additionally, the project must pass a cultural test, scoring enough points on a rubric meant to assess its contribution to the diversity of French and European creation. In the official records of the CNC, the assessment of Expedition 33 appears in unambiguous terms, its value to the French gaming industry affirmed in plain bureaucratic language. But the more instructive question is not what the CNC thinks of Expedition 33, but rather who precisely speaks on its behalf. That is, who determines which project merits public patronage under the guise of cultural support. Contrary to the popular image of the CNC as a haven of state-appointed civil servants, the actual selection process is outsourced, curated by a rotating panel of industry representatives drawn from the broader ecosystem of game development. These individuals are nominally unaffiliated, but their connections are anything but abstract. One name in particular merits closer attention: Sébastien Tessier, seated on the CNC's funding committee as a representative of NetEase, a Chinese gaming conglomerate with global reach. The inclusion of a NetEase representative within the machinery of France's cultural funding apparatus is a matter of public record. It raises an obvious, if inconvenient, question. If the stated goal of the CNC is to cultivate domestic talent and strengthen national cultural production, then on what basis is a figure aligned with a foreign megacorporation invited to shape those outcomes? Is just a formal citizenship sufficient to qualify one as a steward of French cultural interest? Or are we witnessing yet another iteration of economic globalism cloaked in the language of national policy? The tension becomes more evident when we observe the CNC's outward gestures, not only toward global capital but also toward geopolitical alignment. Among its recent initiatives is a public statement of support for the Ukrainian cause. But what's the cultural mandate here? What interest, specifically French, specifically cultural, is being served by the CNC's political declarations? In aligning with international narratives of solidarity, the CNC risks transforming itself from a patron of the arts into an instrument of soft power. This ideological blending is mirrored in the narrative constructed around Expedition 33 itself. According to the official story, widely circulated in media and developer interviews, the game began as a humble endeavor, a skeleton crew of 3 swelling to 30, driven by an ex-Ubisoft developer seeking liberation from corporate constraint, Jennifer Svedberg-Yen. Once a volunteer voice actor becomes the lead writer, voice director, and reportedly the inspiration for the character Lune. It is an uplifting portrait cast in the familiar frame of the indie dream realized, but beneath the romance lies a familiar structure. The idea of the indie team, scrappy, humble, untainted by corporate excess, is belied by industry norms. Even entry-level roles in the indie space often require years of experience, And when we examine the profiles of key team members, the myth of outsider status begins to erode. Take Guillaume Broche, the game's creative lead. His resume is steeped not in rebellion, but in strategy. A history of brand development roles, including prior experience in Shanghai during his tenure at Ubisoft. The language of brand development, often mistaken as a creative or secondary function, is in fact deeply executive. As scholars of marketing note, branding is not merely a cosmetic layer. It is the architecture of identity itself. To develop a brand is to define what a product is, not merely how it is seen. Guillaume Broche is the front-facing CEO of Sandfall Interactive, and the man anointed to bring Clair Obscur to life. On the surface, he is the picture of modern indie genius. But dig a half-inch deeper and you'll find a family portfolio that reads less like humble beginnings and more like the French edition of Succession. Guillaume Broche is the son of Richard Broche, a man with his fingers in 4 highly profitable pies: MBO Plus Investments, Magar Real Estate, SC Broche, likely the Umbrella Corps, and the ever so subtly named Mert Invest. Now, Mert Invest isn't just a family affair, it's a Broche family vehicle. Richard, Guillaume, Alexandre, Adrian, all listed, all in on it. Whatever the French equivalent of a trust fund is, this is it. Guillaume Broche didn't claw his way up from QA testing in some dingy Montreal basement. No, he started his career as an assistant creative director at Ubisoft, an entry-level title at the top of the food chain, served up with foie gras and a side of nepotism. Try landing that gig without a golden Rolodex and a last name that triggers champagne in Parisian boardrooms. So what we're looking at is a well-connected heir with limited frontline experience who somehow assembled the budget and manpower to produce a game with near AAA production quality, all under the banner of being a scrappy upstart. The numbers don't lie. Sandfall's 2023 accounts show 2.7 million euro in debt, owed to the unnamed entity, of course. I'll let you decide who's footing that bill, but something tells me it wasn't Kepler Interactive writing blank checks for the love of art. Take from this what one wills. Some people bootstrap, others are born wearing the boots, and they own the factory that makes them. Now, to be perfectly clear, there's no smoking gun that definitively proves the Broche family fortune was poured directly into the veins of Clair Obscur. I don't have bank statements or a leaked pitch deck with dad's money scribbled in the margins. What I do have is a constellation of circumstantial facts that, when viewed together, makes it rather difficult to believe that absolutely no help came from the Broche financial ecosystem. You don't usually launch near AAA debuts with a handshake and a dream, not without someone somewhere holding the bag. That all being said, let me be absolutely fair here. There's no inherent malice in success, and perhaps Sandfall Interactive deserves genuine credit. They have indeed made a stunning and ambitious video game, something most studios with 10 times their budget could not pull off with a straight face. Nothing illegal seems to have been done here. There's no shady offshore accounts that we know of, and no breach of ethics. So this isn't a whistle blow, this is just an observation. A few dots, loosely connected, passed along for those interested in the bigger picture. And honestly, if I had access to that kind of money, I'd use it too. No shame in leveraging your advantages to chase your dreams. Hell, if I had an uncle who ran 4 investment firms, I wouldn't even be writing this. I'd be busy pursuing my own big project. So let's respect Sandfall Interactive where that's due. But let's also not pretend that this project was built on ramen noodles and bootstrap grit alone. With all this in mind, Expedition 33 appears less as an insurgent cultural product and more as a calculated synthesis of indie aesthetics and global market sensibilities. Its genre classification, voice direction, narrative structure, and funding apparatus are all shaped by forces that transcend national boundaries, even as they are publicly framed as domestically driven. Public funds underwriting projects whose ultimate loyalties lie not with the nation itself, but with the global flows of capital, branding, and influence. And so, when seeking to understand the ideological contours of so-called wokeness in contemporary video games, one must resist the temptation to interpret it merely as the repetition of aesthetic patterns or narrative tropes. Rather, we ought to attend to the institutional self-descriptions, the ethical frameworks and corporate mission statements that shape what is presented as normative. This is the veneer we must look beyond regarding Sandfall Interactive and Expedition 33. Their commitment to a vision of France not as a bounded national polity, but as an open international space that reflects broader political theological commitments. Diversity, then, is not simply a visual motif, but a sacramental sign of a new social imaginary, one in which identity is no longer tethered to historical rootedness, but to mobility and inclusion. Likewise, Latina Parfait, the changes observed in the Oblivion remake cannot be adequately accounted for by aesthetic preference alone. They become legible only in light of Microsoft's adherence to diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates.
Okay, so you said in the beginning of the video that they took male and female assigned roles out of the game.
Yeah,
right?
they did. I mean, they still call you male and female in the game, though. Like, you know.
What's the fucking problem?
No, it's in the character creator. That's the problem. No, that's the problem. Why wouldn't they just leave it as it is then? That's the whole point.
If I had it my way, I would have male and female. Why? So that it doesn't upset people. That's why, because things like this upset people. And I understand why, because people don't want to see gender removed. They don't want to see the overarching progressive themes.
No, they don't have to say it. That's the thing. They don't have to fucking say it. They don't have
to say it, so you can just put words in their mouth?
No, it's not putting. It's reading between the fucking lines. It's reading between the fucking lines, you retard. It's literally reading.
You're assuming you're putting words in their mouth.
Nobody's putting words into their mouth. You can notice the patterns. It's called fucking pattern recognition. You fucking idiot. Like, holy shit, bro. Like, come on. Yeah, pattern recognition.
And yes, this is the only reason they add body types to games or any other progressive bullshit to games, to appease woke dipshits, like I said, for those virtue signal points. Later on in the call, he's going to say, how do I know it's woke? Do I have the written documentation, dude? Source? Like, dude, do you have the source?
Okay, why did they remove?
Why
did they remove fees? How much else?
How do you know?
And yeah, I got it. It's right here. Let's take a look at Virtuous website, which are the people who made the Oblivion remaster.
Driven not just by having their names in the credits, but by the smiles they give to millions of gamers.
It is also about gaming for good, and that our commitment to education, the environment, diversity can inspire a better world for gamers everywhere.
Wow, you hear that, Fortanga? You hear how they are talking about diversity? Wow, dude. Wow, it's almost as if this is the evidence right here that the game is indeed, in fact, woke. It only took but a Google search. Here's your documented evidence from their own mouth talking about diversity. There's more, okay? Let's check out who Microsoft's largest shareholders are, okay? Wow, look at that. Vanguard with the most shares, then right below them, BlackRock with the second most. Wow, it's almost as if the two largest DI woke piece of shit companies surely wouldn't influence Microsoft and everything under their umbrella, correct? Surely they wouldn't influence Bethesda or Virtuous or even id Software. Surely Microsoft isn't woke, nor any of its companies it owns.
And as you well recognize, these were not incidental, they were liturgical. The pattern is not merely seen, it is confessed. Such is the paradox of cultural policy in an era of globalization. The language remains national, but the logic is transnational, and what masquerades as cultural investment may in fact be a form of soft market capture. This also illuminates the case of Warhorse Studios, long celebrated as an independent developer committed to historical fidelity and narrative integrity. And yet, independence, as it turns out, is a fragile ideal under the sovereignty of capital. The inclusion of elements such as gay romance in the figure of Musa of Mali, while ostensibly framed as artistic or inclusive choices, cannot be understood apart from the unspoken catechism of investor mandates and global market expectations. The supposed supposed freedom of such studios reveals itself to be a highly curated performance of autonomy, and as a recently translated interview with Daniel Vavra suggests, the pressures of funding and corporate alignment proved more determinative than any declared creative vision. Independence in this case is not the absence of constraint, but the internalization of a new orthodoxy, one shaped less by artistic conviction than by the liturgical demands of cultural capital. In the age of digital fandom and algorithmically tailored content, it is tempting to believe that genre identity emerges organically, shaped from the grassroots by player communities, content creators, and a consensual cultural osmosis. But a video game genre is often not so much discovered as assigned. The decision to brand Expedition 33 as a JRPG, for example, did not spring from fan consensus or the collective murmurs of Reddit speculation. It in fact originated from Guillaume Broche himself, the brand development manager at Sandfall Interactive. In a candid post to Reddit, Broche explained, "Our demo is almost complete. What we lack are the cutscenes being made right now and some voices behind our characters. The game is a 3D modern take on the JRPG genre, with Western-style characters developed on Unreal Engine 4. The game will be heavy on narration, so voices are very important to us. There's no ambiguity here. The JRPG label was not a retrospective classification, but a forward-facing branding decision, made even before the game's completion, before its voice cast was assembled, before players had any say in what it even felt like to play. This is a disclosure worth registering. Expedition 33 is a JRPG not because it organically resembles one, but because it has been presented as one. JRPG in this context functions less as a descriptive category and more as a marketing tactic, a frame within which the game is meant to be interpreted, and such framing extends beyond genre to personnel. Consider Jennifer Svedberg-Yen, the lead writer and voice localization producer, whose biographical trace is harder to follow in Western digital space. However, in a Taiwanese interview, which was archived on GNN, she introduces herself as an overseas Chinese person born and raised in the United States, with parents from Taiwan, and her role within Sandfall Interactive is surprisingly expansive. I focus on the narrative part, which includes story, world building, and characters. This later expanded into directing dubbing, including English and French dubbing, and localizing the game into 11 languages, including traditional Chinese. This is a profile constructed not simply of skills, but of crossing boundaries, linguistic, geographic, and cultural. Here is a mobility that reflects global capital itself. Multilingual, dispersed, flexible. That Jennifer Svedberg-Yen joined the team in 2020 before the formal founding of the studio suggests her presence is foundational, even if understated in official press. And yet the most revealing passage comes buried, somewhat apologetically, in the final third of the article where Svedberg-Yen reflects on the team's lack of traditional game development experience. "We are a young team. Many of us are getting into gaming for the first time. I have been an investor for most of my life. I am a private equity investor and previously worked in Hong Kong. It is here that the ideological underpinnings of Expedition 33 become clearer. The studio is not an insurgent collective of lifelong game designers, but a startup shaped by the logics of finance. What is being framed as creative naivete, we're still trying to figure out the answers, is in fact a different form of expertise. Private equity, cross-border investment, and portfolio diversification. It is a team of technocrats entering the narrative space not from below, but from beside, from adjacent sectors of capital. What appears on the surface as genre homage, then, is also a case study in how genres are reappropriated for market positioning. What looks like narrative innovation is also venture logic adapting itself to cultural form. The game's multilingualism and genre signaling are not merely artistic choices, but branding strategies rooted in the structural incentives of globalized entertainment markets. The myth of fan-driven genre identity functions to distract from the institutional forces at work behind the veil. And so we return once more to the quiet corridors of Kepler Interactive. And again we find not revolutionaries but financiers, not iconoclasts but investment officers. In other words, we find consistent patterns. We find in-house continuity and conformity. So let's be clear on something. Entering the gaming industry from outside its inner sanctum is no trivial feat. It is not a door, but a wall, and a thick one. As any aspiring developer can attest, the wall is neither transparent nor evenly scaled. While the rhetoric of openness abounds, anyone can make games, we are often told, the reality is that entry often requires not just talent, but networking. Networks that are old, quiet, and self-replicating. Turn to Moby Games and the credits of Expedition 33 offer a quiet cartography of dependence. A litany of special thanks greets the attentive reader. Slow Clap, Tactical Adventures, Ebb Software of Scorn fame, QLock, and QA firms. These are not incidental nods. They are indicators of a production pipeline that is far from self-contained. And for a studio of just 30 developers, this list speaks volumes. Most firms listed are confined to the technical periphery, testing, porting, and engine support. But one, Tactical Adventures, merits further inquiry. It is not merely a vendor, it is a sibling, and its board includes none other than Sébastien Tessier, the same figure whose role in the CNC selection panel we have already noted. And the potential conflict of interest here is not theoretical, it is structural. And yet upon the release of Expedition 33, this network of affiliation just disappears beneath the gloss of celebration. A coordinated chorus from YouTubers to journalists to the President of France himself declared Expedition 33 a triumph, a genre-redefining moment, a masterstroke of modern game design. But when praise is not aimed at the game's mechanics or writing, it drifts instead into abstraction. We are told again and again about passion, about the nobility of the small team, about their courage to innovate, their willingness to dream, the same tropes deployed with suspicious precision. We really sympathize with Kepler Interactive, which is a publisher made up of numerous independent dev studios that reunite to create one publisher. We really wanted this indie vibe, and overall to keep this creative liberty. Indie here functions not as a descriptor, but as a credential, a rhetorical device that absolves scrutiny. One might be forgiven for imagining this narrative emerged organically, from fans and critics alike, moved by authentic enthusiasm. But media, as many of you already suspect, does not operate in a vacuum. Its gravitational fields are predictable. Legacy institutions echo one another. Influencers receive early access, embargoed talking points, and cultivated relationships. If you want to understand the mechanisms of legitimacy in today's industry, you don't start with the official statements. You start with the distribution lists. The industry does not need to lie. It only needs to circulate the same story through enough mouths that it begins to sound like common sense. Now let us briefly turn our attention to the phenomenon known as Pirate Nation. A fuller examination of this X account might warrant an entire video essay, or, more fittingly, a case study in platform manipulation. But as this inquiry is focused on Expedition 33, we will content ourselves with a summary. For the uninitiated, Pirate Nation is an X user operating at the intersection of gaming news, political commentary, emulation advocacy, and low-effort shitposting. With a follower count of nearly 200,000, the presence of Pirate Nation looms large across multiple digital ecosystems. Pirate Nation is frequently cited in online forums and Discord servers as some kind of a legitimate source of both information and culture, a reputation that is not merely accidental nor entirely earned. The methodology of Pirate Nation is deceptively simple. The account screenshots news headlines, often just cropped enough to obscure any citation of author or outlet. No links, no context, and no path back to the origin. To the casual observer, this might resemble laziness, a byproduct of platform brevity. But to mistake this for inattention is to miss the point entirely. This is astroturfing by design. What we are observing is a deliberate method of traffic sequestration, a siphoning operation in which all information, regardless of source, is rerouted through a single personality's feed. It is the strategic presentation of curated information flows as though they were organic grassroots engagement. And supplementing this technique are what appear to be auxiliary accounts on websites such as 4chan, sock puppeting in the old parlance. These accounts serve the usual function, to echo, to reinforce, and to normalize. They create the illusion of consensus by staging applause. The opinions voiced by Pirate Nation thus do not appear to emerge from a singular vantage, but from a movement, one that is often referred to as based, a movement that is self-assured and conveniently aligned with certain ideological vectors. But there is a particular contradiction at the center of Pirate Nation that is worth noting. On the one hand, Pirate Nation performs as a devotee of Japanese culture, including anime aesthetics, nationalist tropes, and the occasional samurai meme. But this admiration is curiously brittle. It collapses whenever Japanese cultural actors express views or produce media that is out of sync with the worldview of Pirate Nation. Meanwhile, Chinese and Korean corporations receive conspicuously gentler treatment. They are rarely interrogated, often praised, and almost never subject to the same intensity of criticism. This asymmetry is not incidental. It signals something deeper about how culture war positions are brokered through algorithmic loyalty, not cultural coherence. In other words, grift. Pirate Nation is not defending a tradition. Rather, the account is selecting vectors of engagement that optimize attention. Attention, in the end, is the currency that matters here. And of course, Pirate Nation follows larger influencers. Figures like Asmongold, Grums, Heel vs. Babyface, and Melanie Mack. But these should not be read as endorsements, they are extractions. Pirate Nation is not part of their audience. Rather, the account is competing for it. And this strategy, in short, is parasitic. It is dressed in the aesthetics of authenticity. Pirate Nation is just a guy posting takes after all, right? But that is what makes it so effective. Let's do a little math here. Below is a comparative snapshot of engagement rates across several prominent X profiles, measured by average comments per post relative to total followers. This discrepancy is not subtle. Pirate Nation's engagement sits at roughly 2.5 times lower than the baseline one might expect, given the size and overlap of the X account's audience. Pirate Nation shares similar territory with these figures, often echoing their talking points and even performing a kind of algorithmic proximity theater, reposting, replying, and shadowing. Yet despite all efforts of Pirate Nation to weave itself into the same digital ecosystem, the actual community interaction among Pirate Nation followers remains conspicuously anemic. Moreover, Pirate Nation enjoys a surprisingly large following on Blue Sky, a platform on which the account contributes virtually no effort. The numbers suggest something odd, that the audience for Pirate Nation follows the account automatically, without prompting, without friction, as if by instinct or coordination. And now enter the leakers. Among the founding members of Pirate Nation's Discord server are several figures frequently cited by games media as sources. Individuals with usernames like Doodle, Matfacio, and Visceral. These are not anonymous forum dwellers, however. They are serial data miners and self-styled insiders. Most are associated with a loosely defined collective known as Team XOX Leak, a name that appears with regularity in coverage by IGN, Eurogamer, Insider Gaming, and similar outlets. Doodle identifies himself as someone who has broken gameplay leaks for multiple major titles. Matfacio describes himself as a professional data collector. Visceral maintains a portfolio of featured leaks and even advertises himself as available for contact should you be in the market for embargo breaches. They all function as some kind of a shadow press corps, filling the vacuum left by understaffed publications, and they operate with a sort of mythic veneer, and that myth is functional. It benefits official journalists who rely on figures such as Team XOX Leak to bridge content gaps, and that in turn benefits the leakers who gain influence, clout, and sometimes material reward. But for all the idealism attached to leaking, truth-telling, public interest, insider knowledge, one must also of course consider the marketing utility of a well-timed breach. Leaks are rarely accidental. Think of them as early release trailers by another name. If not orchestrated directly, they are at least permitted to remain in digital space as corporate beta tests for market appetite, all cloaked in the illusion of industry industry rebellion like their QAnon for gamers. This is all about social engineering. It's all a huge psyop for the corporations to put their finger upon the pulse of consumer engagement. All this is to say that Pirate Nation's relationship with XOX Leak is not incidental to Pirate Nation's brand. For all intents and purposes, it is the brand. For without them, there is no reach, no scoop, and no narrative control. And so what at first appears to be a grassroots movement throughout digital space is in reality a clever distribution network. Now earlier I alluded to the unusually strong performance of Expedition 33 in East Asian markets. The explanation is in some ways quite simple. France holds an enduring allure in countries like Japan, Korea, and China, an aesthetic ideal wrapped in notions of elegance, art, and cultivated mystique. The Japanese even have a term for the emotional dissonance that can result when fantasy collides with reality. To borrow their term is to understand the game's tonal pivot, from early steampunk prototypes to a finalized vision clearly indebted to the Belle Epoque. In China in particular, Western luxury signals prestige. French aesthetics, architecture, fashion, culinary motifs carry aspirational weight, especially among the rising middle class. This is what gives rise to phenomena like white monkey jobs, where foreigners are paid simply to embody Westernness in ads or events. The logic is not about diversity, it's about exoticism as a market feature. And here the alignment becomes clear. To successfully penetrate the Chinese market, one needs more than localization. One needs institutional facilitation. Promotion by domestic tech giants is less a marketing decision than a gatekeeping function. China is not a free market. It is a curated one. Take Tencent, for example. The company has at least 7,915 confirmed members of the Chinese Communist Party embedded within its workforce. Its CCP committee is subdivided into 12 general branches, 116 local units, and nearly 100 internal CCP liaisons. Not employees in the traditional sense, but ideological officers. Oversight is not occasional, it is infrastructural. So when we see Expedition 33, a game with clear Francophile appeal, quiet links to Chinese adjacent funding structures, and a distribution pathway to Chinese platforms, we should not be surprised by its success, nor should we be naive about the machinery behind it. China's ongoing effort to poach international talent is also well documented. Developers are incentivized with better pay, clearer hierarchies, and an explicit absence of what corporate recruiters sometimes euphemize as cultural volatility. Diversity mandates are minimal. Political controversy is also discouraged. The target is creative output that has been optimized for global consumption, but also made domestically legible. In this light, the success of Expedition 33 becomes less of a Cinderella story and more of a coordinated operation, an elegant collaboration between state-adjacent capital, curated aesthetics, and of course, algorithmically guided influence networks. Pirate Nation in this configuration plays a role. A small one perhaps, but a strategic one nonetheless. And there is a term for this role in Chinese internet slang, Wu Mao, a reference to low-paid commentators who flood forums with pro-China messaging and discredit dissenting narratives. So for now, given the current shape of things, this is the play. Not because it's noble, not because it's efficient, but because it works. For the right people. You've no doubt heard the talking points. $50 for a game like this? Incredible value. A sentiment echoed, amplified, and memed across every platform like gospel. But let's drop the reverence for a moment. This price point isn't the result of some master stroke in production logistics, nor a revelation in lean indie budgeting. No, what we are likely looking at is subsidy disguised as savvy. Price suppression not by innovation, but by injection. Someone somewhere is footing the difference. Something also worth noting. China's border policy, famously rigid when it comes to importing foreign influence or undesirable ideas, has always been markedly indifferent when things flow outward, be it counterfeit goods, unvetted capital, or say, pandemics. What exits the country is of considerably less concern than what enters. Money in this case leaves no fingerprint on the way out, just opportunity. So ask yourself, how does a small studio, one without a single shipped title, find itself backed by international financiers, endorsed by media giants, flanked by data miners, graced with pre-released Hollywood interest, and praised by Emmanuel Macron himself? How does that trajectory square with the hundreds of other small but passionate teams who have collapsed in obscurity despite working twice as hard? Does this look like an indie studio to you? Or does it look like a carefully cultivated asset wrapped in indie aesthetics? Because we've seen how this story ends, many times. A talented but naive creator gets sold a roadmap. Follow the rules, keep your head down, check the boxes, stay authentic. And he builds, he polishes, he obeys. 4 years pass. His game launches to silence. He looks around and sees no one left. The people who praised his discipline have vanished into the algorithm. And now his community is fractured. His studio has closed. And he is left with nothing but forums full of all of this advice, and yet his soul has been left chipped by betrayal. And so it is not enough to say, just work hard, or be passionate, or don't give up, because what is actually required is far colder: insight, leverage, and a ruthless resistance to illusion. Because we now know the true path forward. Those within the highest echelons continually succeed, not based on merit, or artistic acumen, or ambition, but through deception, manipulation, and cowardice. Gaming is dead.